When we were in high school, I got him interested in kind of avant-garde film. We went to see Alexander Nevsky that Eisenstein directed. And the climax of that picture is the battle on the ice. The charge of those German knights is probably the best music of its kind ever done. It's Prokofiev again. And it affected Stanley so deeply. He bought the record and played the record over and over and over again. He had a sister who was about 4 years younger than he was, and she pleaded with him to stop playing that thing because it was making her crazy. And finally, she pulled it off the record player and broke it over his head.
I could play music in my office, and he'd come in and say, "What's this, Leon? Music for decomposing brains." if it was too kind of fragmentary and too kind of experimental, then he wasn't particularly taken with it. But he loved Mozart. He loved Mozart. We used to sit and work to Mozart a lot. He understood things were classic because they were classic. That's the only way you could feel about them, think about them. He was very Catholic in his tastes in just about everything.
He was addicted to music. He played it always, all day long. He worked with music, classical and the pop songs, and he liked jazz, and he liked, you name it, a very Catholic taste in music.
And the one area where we really connected, where I was on his level, but there were very few levels where I had a chance, was music.
He was cutting the spaceships and all, and he says everything in the new technique, everything in nature turns. Everything turns. If it doesn't turn, it's not alive. So all the spaceships turn. The world turns. And he said, I know it would sound old-fashioned to do a waltz, but that's what they're doing. And I think I can really cut it like that, And he started dancing around his garage, and he had the Blue Danube, and he then listened to all the different recordings and decided on Karajan. Just immediately, the minute he heard them, he sat at the cutting machine, and said, "This is perfect."
And he did, in fact, then, 2001, he asked me about music. And he was looking for something that was grand and great and came to an end, because he respected music, he respected composers and didn't like to cut or fade out. So I said, well, when you come next time, go through your LPs and see whether you find something that's really interesting. So I got a whole stack of Mahler and Berlioz and Bruckner and Wagner and Strauss and what have you. And one of the things was Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Richard Strauss. He liked already the title because it really fitted the spirit of the film.
This is very interesting as to Stanley's approach. On 2001, after we'd been shooting about 6 months or so, Stanley had to put show reels together to show the visiting guys from MGM in New York. They wanted to see how their money was being spent. So he'd put a 10-minute show reel together in the cutting room, which of course was mute, so he wouldn't want to lay a music track on it. So I remember it was one Friday he called me into his office and said, can you go and grab one of the Unicar drivers and get £300 cash from Ron Phipps, the accountant, which was a lot of money in '67. And he said, listen, go out and buy some really interesting music, lots of it. He said, I don't want any of this musique concrète, or concrete music, as he used to call it. He said, we're talking symphonic music. What we did the following day, Saturday, and I remember Stanley saying to me, he said, listen, we've got to get through this quickly. you're going to take the 12-inch LPs out of the sleeve and hand them to me. I'm going to put them on this record player and then put the needle on. Blah, blah, blah. And you've always got to be ready with another one because we've got a lot of stuff to get through. And then he chose appropriate music to go with the show reel for the MGM guys. So then, when filming was almost completed, and Alex North, I mean, a very well-established and acclaimed Hollywood composer, came over, started viewing the film, writing music, and started recording it at Denham Studios. And what Stanley had got used to and had been listening to for the last 18 months were all these wonderful tracks off these albums. And I mean, there was no way that Alex could come up with anything to equal that. Then Stanley realised what he had to do was buy the rights for the music that he'd got used to over the years. And he would do that on all his subsequent films, is search around, listen to music that already existed rather than rely on, I mean, he might get a composer in to do some odds and ends, but he more or less knew what he wanted. And of course, you know, there was the serendipitous thing on 2001 of Christiana hearing the Ligeti music on the BBC third programme, as was. She said, Stanley, you should really listen to this, you know. And that put Ligeti on the map.
And what we would do with Full Metal Jacket, for instance, would be to play all the records and rock, country, everything, and just keep playing while he was cutting scenes. And so if something kind of came to him from that music, you know, and we tried to find all the iconic stuff that was happening in you know, the late 60s, early 70s, and what they would have been listening to in Vietnam. And so it was all kind of trial and error, and it, you know, we're talking about months of doing this. And so he'd kind of glean it down to some kind of list of favourites that he liked or that he thought would be helpful inside a scene. And that's really how he came across that crazy track called Surfing Bird. With Surfing Bird, he kind of kept it on the back burner. And when we were doing the final mix, there was a scene where they got these 4 snipers and they gunned them down. And he said, I need something, a Surfing Bird. And he said, put that on. And so we put it on, and it was amazing because it started right on cue and it finished right on cue at the very end of the scene. It was like, he just turned around and he said, see, when it works, it works.
I think he liked the style of the original of the book, The Short Timers, and what it had to say about America. He felt very American. There were long discussions and negotiations about the Mickey Mouse song, and this, in some respects, went to the heart of his sensitivities as an American living overseas, I think. Not that he would open up or talk about those things very often, but I think he cared very much.
With Eyes Wide Shut, you know, we were looking for music and looking for music. It was really when somebody told him to get these Ligeti piano pieces that it kind of clicked for him. You know, it worked inside the film with that build-up of suspicion and anger and that kind of trite jealousy that was going on in the story. And also, you know, he discovered the Shostakovich jazz album, which is the opening music to the film, which was just perfect. He didn't want things that dated it. It wasn't a question of just playing a great track that everybody would know. It actually had to have an intricacy which fitted with the emotional temperature of the scene. And then I can't put it any other way than emotional temperature, because that's what he was always looking for.